Last episode, we expose how the courts turn the right to vote into a balancing act. But what happens when judges stop pretending to be referees and start calling the plays? When the branch meant to guard liberty becomes the one that governs every corner of life? Welcome to modern America, where 9 unelected lawyers decide everything from your paycheck to your pronouns, your taxes to your prayers, your home to your health, where judicial restraint is dead and judicial deference is the gospel, where the courts no longer protect you from the state, they partner with it. This is Constitutional Outlaw, Episode 6. From Guardian to Governor, Judicial Expansion into Everything. The Guardian that betrayed its post. The founders created the judiciary as the weakest branch. Article 3 gave judges life tenure, so they could resist political pressure, not wield political power. Their only duty, apply the law in cases and controversies. But over time, interpretation became legislation, review became rule, and deference became obedience. The court stopped guarding liberty and started managing the nation. Every time another branch reached beyond its bounds, the judiciary said, "We'll allow it." Every time citizens demanded accountability, the judges said, "We'll balance it." And every time government claimed new authority, the courts found it reasonable. That's not guardianship. That's complicity. The age of deference, when judges bowed to bureaucracy. Let's talk about Chevron deference. In Chevron, Natural Resources Defense Council, 1984, the Supreme Court ruled that when a law is ambiguous, courts must defer to an agency's interpretation of it. Read that again. Unelected bureaucrats, not judges, not Congress, not the people, now decide what the law means. This single doctrine built the administrative state. It turned agencies into mini governments with the power to write, interpret, and enforce their own rules. EPA, ATF, CDC, IRS all claim near total authority, backed by judicial deference. A judge's job was to check them. Instead, they became enablers. And it didn't stop there. O.R. Robbins, 1997, extended the same deference to agencies' interpretations of their own regulations. Imagine that, the fox not only guarding the henhouse, but defining what guarding means. Chevron deference sounds technical, but it's the legal DNA of modern tyranny, the doctrine that allowed thousands of pages of regulations to replace one simple sentence. Congress shall make no law. Executive power unleashed. Courts didn't just bow to bureaucrats. They bent the knee to presidents. The founders never envisioned executive orders as law. Yet today, entire national policies are enacted with a signature, blessed by courts that shrug and say, the president acted within his discretion. From Lincoln's wartime suspensions to Roosevelt's internment camps to Biden's mandates, judicial review has meant rubber stamp. When presidents cite emergency powers, judges nod like priests in a temple of excuses. Every tyrant wraps himself in the language of crisis. And every time the courts answer, we must defer to the executive. Deference is the death of separation of powers. Once a guardian defers, it ceases to guard. State power and federal control. While federal judges surrender to the executive, state courts learn to mimic them. State constitutions, once strongholds of individual rights, are now interpreted to the same balancing logic that gutted the Federal Bill of Rights. Local judges parrot federal precedent instead of defending their own citizens. They defer upward, turning state sovereignty into a paperwork formality. The result? A centralized system that looks federal but acts imperial. You can vote locally, argue locally, even sue locally, but your fate still rests with Washington's approval. The Constitution gave the federal judiciary limited jurisdiction, but precedent creep made it infinite. Every issue, from bathrooms to banking, now ends at the steps of the same marble temple. A temple built to serve justice, but repurposed to sanctify power. The cult of expertise. How did the judges justify the surrender? By worshiping a new idol, expertise. They said bureaucrats know better, that agencies have technical competence, that courts should defer to scientific judgment. Translation: your rights are suspended until the experts agree you deserve them. When the CDC orders lockdowns, the courts defer. When the ATF redefines a firearm, the courts defer. When the IRS interprets tax code to seize property, the courts defer. When the EPA regulates puddles as navigable waters, the courts defer. And through it all, they call it reasonable. They don't even hide the word anymore. Reasonable restrictions, reasonable regulations, reasonable search. The Bill of Rights doesn't mention reasonableness. It says shall not be infringed. But the judiciary translated that into shall not be infringed unless we feel like it. The judicial invasion of private life. Now, the judiciary doesn't just govern law. It governs life. It dictates family structure, marriage definitions, religious exemptions, business ethics, environmental habits, and speech boundaries. They say, we must balance rights against social harm. But the social harm they fear is citizens thinking for themselves. When courts decide what counts as hate speech, or when the FBI can read your messages, or when your child can be taught ideology at school, that's not justice. That's governance. The robe has replaced the crown. And it's time we start saying so. The judicial executive partnership. Tyranny in sync. Here's the truth. The judiciary and the executive are no longer rivals. They're partners. When presidents overreach, courts legalize it. When agencies expand, courts rationalize it. When legislatures resist, courts reinterpret them out of existence. That's how you get a country where laws are optional but compliance is mandatory, where citizens don't know who's in charge, because the answer is everyone in power and no one accountable. The founders fought a monarchy. We built one with 3 heads and called it democracy, the people's judgment. So where does that leave us? Standing in the ruins of divided power, staring at a government that governs itself, a government that calls itself free, while licensing every act of freedom. If you don't know your rights, you don't have any, and if you don't recognize your rulers, you'll mistake them for judges. The only remedy is knowledge, raw, historical, unapologetic truth, because every inch of overreach began with ignorance. Learn the Constitution. Teach your children. Read the cases they use against you. Refuse to worship expertise. And above all, remember, they serve at your consent, not by divine right. When the courts became governors, they betrayed their oath. When citizens become informed, that betrayal ends. This is Constitutional Outlaw, the people's courtroom against overreach. Because justice doesn't plead bargain, and neither should you.